Hi, I'm Ozzy Hull. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. This video looks at the AM1026 Preset Voltages module in Eurorack format. This module from Amsynths is a companion module to the Behringer 1027 sequencer. The original ARP2500 had a 1026 Preset Voltages module, although they only existed as prototypes. So what does the 1026 do? First, let's quickly review the 1027 8x3 sequencer. There are 3 columns of 8 steps each. There is 1 knob per step per column. Each column has a voltage output. The most basic use for these outputs is to control the frequency of a voltage-controlled oscillator. I have several videos on the 1027. See a link above to the playlist. With that background on the 1027, let's review 3 different ways to select active channels on the 1026 Preset Voltages module. Number 1 is sequence mode, which is what we're looking at right now. The 1026 Preset Voltages module provides 2 additional columns, each column with a voltage output. The 1027 and 1026 can be connected via a ribbon cable in the back. This will keep the 1027 and 1026 synced to the same step. You can enable or disable this sync by pressing the Enable Sequencer illuminated button. For sequencers, more is better when it comes to steps and columns. Beyond providing 2 more CV outputs synced to the 1027, what capability does the 1026 have? Number 2, standalone mode. If you're familiar with the Behringer 1050 mix sequencer, you know that it can be synced to the 1027 with a back panel ribbon controller. This is just like connecting the 1027 to the 1026 for sequenced mode, which we just looked at. If you're not familiar with the 1050, see a link above. On the 1050 mix sequencer, you can also manually enable a specific step, any or all of them. To do this, you can use the 8 illuminated square white buttons. There's also a set of 8 round red buttons that can be used to solo a specific step. The one step will be enabled and the remaining steps will be disabled. This behavior is known as exclusive OR logic, written XOR and pronounced XOR. The 1026 has a set of illuminated green manual set buttons, one for each step. If a step is enabled in any way, the green button is lit. Pressing one of these buttons enables the step manually using XOR logic. There is also a clear button which disables all channels that have been enabled from these front panel buttons. Note that the XOR logic only applies to the steps enabled from these buttons. If a step on the 1026 is enabled from the 1027 sequencer gates via the back panel, that step will not be disabled by the front panel when the green front panel manual set button is pressed. Similarly, if you press the clear, it will only clear the manual set buttons. So that's the standalone mode. Number 3, setting gates mode. You can also enable specific steps using the jacks which are labeled setting gates. It is possible to enable multiple channels via these gates. Note that the step voltages are summed when multiple channels are enabled. Also, each output is limited to either 2 volts or 10 volts. So it is possible to hit the limit of the output even though none of the enabled steps is at that limit. For example, if you had 2 steps that were enabled that were set at 55%, the output would never exceed the maximum voltage set for the output channel. The step gates work as any other gate input. You could use the gate signals from a keyboard and patch it into the 1026 setting gates input. You could also use the step gate outputs from the 1027 and patch those in. I'm going to patch the square wave output from an LFO into this step gate input. Note that the channel is enabled when the gate is high. So the three modes for enabling steps on the 1026 include sequencer mode, standalone mode, and setting gates mode. You can use any or all of these modes at the same time. Again, watch out for hitting the limit of the output on the 1026 when multiple channels are enabled. Also, remember that the XOR logic of the front panel buttons does not apply to any channels enabled by the sequencer mode or by the setting gates mode. That covers the ground rules associated with enabling channels. It also covers the front panel controls except for the two slider switches at the bottom labeled 10 volt and 2 volt. Each of the two precision outputs has an associated range switch. In the up position, the range will be 0 to 10 volts. In the down position, the range will be 0 to 2 volts. The 2 volt range is perfect for adjusting voltages going to any volt per octave input such as an oscillator. Now let's look at some use cases. At this point, let me ask you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. As I mentioned in the intro, the most obvious application of any sequencer output is to control pitch. I'll be demonstrating pitch control, but only in the course of some other use cases. The next most common use of a sequencer output might be to control the clock that drives the sequencer itself. I say that because both ARP's 1027 sequencer and Moog's 960 sequencer allowed voltage control of the internal clock frequency from a sequencer control voltage output. Both sequencers also allow control over the width of the internal clock pulse. On the 960, this control is manual and requires the 961 interface module. On the 1027, this pulse width is under voltage control. Let's hear this in action. First, let's control the pulse width. We're controlling it from this CV output. Now let's control the clock frequency. And now let's get a variation on the filter from an LFO. Next, we can control timbre from a sequencer. The most common way to do this is to route a CV from the sequencer to the filter cutoff. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking this output and routing it into the cutoff frequency of our filter. First, I'll start with no modulation. I'll increase it over time, and then I will adjust some of the step voltages so that you can hear the result. For the next example, we're going to use a ring modulator to create radical differences in the timbre. And what we're going to do is use our two voltages to control the pitch of two oscillators going into this ring modulator. In addition, we've got the sequencer output from the 1027 that's going to change the pitch of this first oscillator. In addition, we've got the sequencer output of this 1027, which is going to also contribute to the pitch change of the first oscillator. So let's open the amplifier and hear the timbre that we've got. And we can change our pitch on the second oscillator. Another thing that we have control over is the pulse width of the second oscillator, and listen to the tonal changes. So we're dialing in tonal changes from the ring modulation as well as harmonic changes from the pulse width variations, and both of which are under the control of this 1026 Preset Voltages module. Let's listen as I enable the clock. Later I'll add some delay and add some filter modulation from an LFO. For our last example, we're going to route the CV to the control input of a VCA. This will allow us control over the level of any audio signal or control signal. We can route that signal wherever we want. Here are some examples of the source and destination signals. Number 1, an envelope routed to the signal input of the VCF or VCA for accents. Number 2, a VCO routed to the FM input of a VCO, VCF, or VCA for frequency modulation. Number 3, a voice output routed to an effects device for preset effects levels. We're going to try the effects send example. Initially, I'll have the effects output off so you can hear the dry signal. And now we'll add the effects signal from this column. At this point, let me ask you to please like this video and subscribe to my channel. In conclusion, what makes the 1026 Voltages module so valuable is the ability to enable steps in any one of 3 ways. Number 1, sequencer mode, in sync with the 1027 sequencer. Number 2, standalone mode, to instantly recall critical voltage settings at the push of a button. And number 3, setting gates mode, for control from any gate signal. The standalone mode seems particularly interesting to me because of the manual random access to any of the 8 steps. Thanks for watching. I'll close with a longer version of the ring mod example from earlier.